Thanks for plugging into this creative outlet. It's time for Architecture, Coffee, and Ink. Hello, this is Hollywood C, and you're listening to Architecture, Coffee, and Ink, a podcast dedicated to introducing concepts, detailing out designs, and tackling the architecture you might not realize the meaning behind. I'm your hostess, and I'm here today to start introducing you to the designs that make you wonder why. So I ask you to brew your coffee, grab your sketchbook and pen, and let's begin. Hello, and welcome to the show, and welcome to all my designers, dreamers, and everyone in between. If this is your first episode or you've been with me from the beginning, I'm excited to have you here again in 2023. And I am so excited today to be sharing a conversation I had with Doug Shapiro, who many of my listeners might recognize as the host of Imagine a Place podcast. In addition, Doug is currently Vice President of Research and Insights at OFS, children's author, and recipient of the HIP Award in 2021, which is Interior Designs Honoring Industry People. Thank you so much, Doug, for joining me on the show. I am so excited to have you here today.
Good. I'm doing great. And as I mentioned, I'm just happy to be here with you. Since I've learned about your podcast, I've been able to dial into a few episodes. So I love what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. I've listened to several of your episodes, and my goddaughter absolutely loves your book. She has it, and I didn't realize it was you at first.
That's awesome. That's super exciting.
So would you mind just telling a little bit more about yourself and your history? I know my listeners would love to hear your story.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Doug Shapiro. I'm the VP of Research and Insights at OFS. And I've been with OFS for about 18 years and really started in the product design space. Mm-hmm. And what I kind of learned through product design, when you engage in design, you always start with the context, right? Try to understand the context in which this object will sit. Well, I became way more interested in the context than the actual product, which kind of led me out of product design and more into some of the research and work that I'm doing now. And as part of that, a lot of the research is more qualitative by nature, and it led me into the world of conversation, and which eventually led me to this podcast, Imagine a Place, and that has been a true joy to do over the last few years.
Could you tell us a little bit more about Imagine a Place? I know that my listeners would love it, and I've been listening to it off and on for a while now, so I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, thank you, Hollywood. So we started in May or April of 2020, and we've got over 100 episodes, and it's a variety of interior designers, architects, of course, and then we also explore people outside or adjacent to the design space. So we'll talk to end users. We'll talk to change management experts, human resources people, people that are just experts. I had an expert on informational health, which is really interesting. But it all ties back to design and then the impact that place has on us. But I ended up, just like I did with product design, became more interested in the people sometimes than the actual power of place. And so many of the episodes are actually very personal, people sharing stories and their personal journeys. So it's been fun way to get to know the industry better.
No, it's definitely inspirational. As a thesis student, when I was listening to your episode, you were kind of playing in the background a couple of times. And it was just interesting to hear. It gave us a much more personal connection, I feel like, than a lot of our classes do, because you learn from a textbook, you learn staring at slides and examples. So it's very wonderful from a student perspective. For all my student listeners who haven't listened, go tell your teachers to do it right now.
That feels so good to hear. Thank you so much.
When podcasting, because you're my first ever additional podcast host to be on the show with me, what type of lessons have you learned as you've gone through your journey? I'd love to hear more about your journey. I know most of my listeners know mine. It's been very sporadic and just been thesis driven. So it's interesting to now move past thesis and into an adult environment. I feel like I'm still a baby and still learning everything.
Oh, I guess we'll always be feeling that way, because I still feel that way, after 18 years. And I'd love to turn that question around on you at some point and kind of learn from you also. For me, one of the things I've picked up is where good communication comes from. Mm-hmm. And so I'll toss out 3 numbers to you. Okay. 55, 38, and 7. Okay. And so my advice would be to write those numbers down. It sounds like a high school locker code. It's not, I promise you. But it's really the breakdown of communication. So 55% of what you feel from me when we're communicating is nonverbal. It's just how I present myself, right? In a podcast, you really don't get that 55%, right? So you're left with the 38 and the 7. 38% of what you feel from me is how I say what I'm saying. And then 7% is actually what I'm saying. And what I found is the best guests that I have on my show are the ones that don't focus so much on what they're saying and they just speak from the heart. And when they do that, their authenticity comes out, their passion comes out, and it ends up being a great episode. When I have people on that are just so calculated, they're just, so concerned with saying the right thing, the message never comes out. People leave that episode early. And so that was something I kind of picked up on over time as I started looking at my metrics of how long people would stick around for certain episodes. So it allowed me to start to look for those people, like who speaks with passion, who lets it go. And some of that is just honestly about letting go of your agenda and kind of trusting that you have good intentions and that those will surface, and your message, whatever it is that you're trying to share, will be felt. And I think that is what ends up making for great communication. So I guess where I'm taking this for you is if you've got listeners, it doesn't matter really where you're at in your profession, whether you're speaking to a client or you're doing a job interview, is to remember that 55, 38, 7. Because even if I said the word thank you or thanks, you could say thanks or thanks. It's like means totally different things. So just focus on that 38, how you say what you're saying. That's my advice, or what I've picked up from being a host.
No, that's really interesting. I definitely realized when I did the same thing, looking back over the episodes I was so concerned about, did I say that exact fact or that exact fact? And did I regurgitate that information? Nobody listened to them. I think they're my lowest episodes I ever have numbers wise. So it's crazy to think about. And it's definitely applicable, I feel like, to design as well. But I'm not sure about you, but I do feel like when you talk with clients and stuff, if you are honest and straightforward, it does come through a lot better than if you're like holding your little note cards in front of your face and trying to regurgitate exactly your retort.
Totally. It does come through. And it also comes through in listening too. Like if you're concerned about the next thing you're going to say, then, and I see this, like I'll listen to podcasts and then like a host will be so concerned about the next question, the guest will say something brilliant. Right. And then the host will just, okay, on to the next question. I'm like, did you just hear that? That was amazing. You have to respond. And I think the same thing happens too when you're communicating is to really let go of that agenda and listen deeply. And then that'll trust that you have good intentions and that you'll respond.
See, we had to learn from I think it was the Art of Listening book in high school, where we had to learn, how do you listen actively? How do you encourage? And I definitely feel like the first couple episodes, I was so terrified of having my first ever guest, even if it was my best friend, that we just spent 3 hours re-recording because we could not get through anything. I did the exact same thing you're saying. She said something brilliant and I just said, okay, great, next.
Yeah, that's funny. I listen back to early episodes and feel the same way. And in fact, it was probably the first 10 recordings I did, we never launched. So
really,
that just shows you. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a curve that you go through, and it's not a struggle to listen to yourself. It's actually an opportunity to actually listen to yourself and how you interact, because it's an opportunity to improve.
As well as learn how many times you say the word and like in a sentence.
So true. Yes, so true. That's funny.
But I'm also really interested in kind of your human-centric design, just because I've heard you speak about it and this idea of place. And I know you said you're more interested in people now instead of place, but I would just love to learn more about it. It's such a fascinating subject and you're the expert. So we would love to hear it.
Sure. Let's go there. With human-centered design, I think there's some things that are just understood by the very nature of its name. But if you think about all the factors that tug at us when we design: budget, footprint, branding, technology, flexibility, all these things, they affect our priorities. And when you let those constraints in too early and you don't start with this basic understanding of what's best for people, I think it can really damage an outcome. There's times in our industry that we've done that. Like if I look at kind of 2010 coming out of the recession, that 2010 through 2013 run, there was so much focus on footprint, on space utilization, utilization. And that was when we launched benching. I mean, to me, that was a betrayal of human-centered design, straight benching. Now, benching works in some scenarios, but to just say, we're just going to put a sea of benches in a space, and then this is human-centered design was a total mistake. And I think what we did was we retrofitted a human-centered story to make it sound good. Collaboration. We said, you take down everything, it will support collaboration. It did let in a lot of sunlight. Okay, that's a good thing. That was human-centered in nature as it relates to benching. But in general, I think what we didn't do was account for all the different kinds of people that are in a space and all the different kinds of needs that they have. So I do think that one of the core tenets of human-centered design is understanding that the world is full of different people, and rather than designing for the mean, the average, you need to design for the variety, for the bell curve, and rather than design for the center of the bell curve. And I think that's a process and an understanding that we've gone through as an industry, really, even more lately. We've peanut butter spread our spaces for too long, and we needed to be okay with an office that wasn't precious and perfect, but instead was more reflective of the variety of people that are in it.
So I would love to touch back on, I feel like you kind of threw out a couple buzzwords out there, I guess is what we call them now, like collaboration and things like that. So would you say that in your experience from what you're talking about, like early on, it was more about the buzzwords and less about the peanut butter? I really love that expression. I'm sorry. I'm really distracted with that.
Yeah, I think we were still understanding all the dynamics of human-centered design, just like we were still understanding all the dynamics of well-being, right? Just think about that word and how much broader of an understanding we have of that word today than we did 10 years ago. Well-being was really, sit-to-stand desks. And there were things like biophilia and lighting that came into there, but there's a whole emotional side to it, and mental health that we've become so much more aware of as an industry, as a society. And so I think we've all grown. And so that's all improved our practice of human-centered design. It became more well-rounded and more understood. And that'll probably continue to happen. I think data and research has had a major impact on human-centered design and understanding what's possible and how space affects people. And so more than ever before, I feel like the profession of interior design has a place of importance.
Okay. And when you're saying like data and research, what would that look like from your perspective as an interior design? Because as an architect and landscape is my background, so I'm not as familiar with what you guys would consider good research. And you're the first interior design based person to be on my show, so I'm so excited for that.
Cool.
So would you mind just kind of like, what would good research look like, and what would really bad research look like?
I think the research doesn't always have to have a direct tie to space, but simply, we have a better understanding now of the impact of light on our sleep patterns. We have a better understanding of the impact of nature. Not even, literally, like even a fake plant is good for you, right? Nature's ability to impact our stress levels, our creativity levels, which are really creativity and stress are tied together. We're not creative when we're stressed, despite what people think. And, so like those are areas of research that are not about design, but impact design. And I think that's happening all over too. We're understanding neurodiversity at a greater level, and how different brains work, and how certain brains need high levels of stimulation to perform at their best. And other people need very secluded spaces to perform at their best. If I asked you to describe a normal person, it would be impossible to do, right? You couldn't do it. So I think the understanding of people and how they work, again, it's not a research on space, but it's research that will impact how we design space. So now we're designing spaces that account for all those things.
Okay. And when you're talking about pulling in nature, is that kind of what you meant by biophilia earlier on?
Yeah. Yeah. So the ability to bring the influences of the outside world into the interior space. And sometimes it can be as simple as literally plant life, and that's heavily impactful. or sunlight, but it can also even just be how we use color and texture and patterns to reflect, to evoke the same feeling.
Okay, as a biologist, we have a very different definition of biophilia. So.
Well, I would love to hear a more succinct and probably more educated definition of biophilia.
It's more just like for me, when the first time I was researching it, I heard biophilia and I was like, oh, nature loving or bio loving. And then I was focused more on like biological organisms. And I think there's a biology professor of mine crying themselves to sleep and they don't even know why. They're just like, I failed her as a person.
No, I think, and I think that actually there are words I think that our industry and phrases that our industry uses in different ways than the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And I would bet biophilia is one of them. And, we also interchange sometimes in the wrong way, biophilia and biomimicry. Right. That's another confusion that we make sometimes. But yeah, I think it's maybe it's just more simply said, bringing the influence of the outside world to the inside world. And that's it. We don't need to name it.
No, I love the name. Like I absolutely loved it. I was reading it and I was like, oh man, this is great terms. I love it. It's very succinct, I feel like. I enjoy the play of words, especially in conversations. And I'm probably a buzzword, like biggest supporter, not on purpose, but I accidentally use those like synergy unironically, which I shouldn't, but here we are.
Yeah, I've heard you call out a few puns on your episodes before. So you've got the word bug. It's
a very bad habit. I like to hear though, people will write in and tell me all the words they hear, all the puns. So it's kind of like a nice game, Easter egg hunt, I guess.
I love it.
At its root core, human-centric design sounds like it's pretty much common sense. Like you're saying, you're bringing nature. It's focused on wellness, and you said well-being and conscious and deliberate design and intervention. I feel like though it's only talked about pretty brief. How do you see it being pulled in more? Because I would love to see it more mainstream in everyday conversations.
Yeah. I think there are ways we can think about, or just kind of priorities that we can bring into our design practices and our work. I mean, very basic one that we're stealing this from the medical profession. First, do no harm. Like that. Just saying that out loud. Thinks, okay, now we understand that there are things that we can do in design, decisions that we can make with products we choose, with how we deal with light and things that can actually have a harmful effect on people. So understanding that, I think, is, is really huge. Educating yourself on air quality, on toxins, things like that. I think deep listening is another priority, where we can try to make sure that human-centered design is accounting for, again, all types of people and not the average person, or the quote unquote average person. Here's an exploration of kind of thinking differently about space through a human-centered lens. I was listening to a speaker. I was at Workspaces in Palm Springs recently. Rex Miller, who's a friend of mine, was on stage, and he was talking about, he's like an author and consultant and kind of I would call him like a ethnographic scientist. I'm not sure even, like here I am butchering words again. Oh my gosh, your best friend hate me. But anyway, so Rex was like, he's talking about heart attacks. He said there are more heart attacks on Mondays than any other day in the week, and at least in like the last 2 decades. And what he says it's tied to is stress. It's work related stress. And what he said is, the opposite of stress is how you feel. Do you have a dog? Sorry, I'm interrupting myself.
No, I do. He's somewhere around here.
Okay, so if I asked you to think about your dog, and if you're listening, actually like do it, like close your eyes, think about your dog. That feeling that you have when you're next to your dog is the feeling of serotonin going into your brain. And the way Rex described it was that is the opposite of stress. That is when you are your most healthiest. That is when you are your safest, your most creative and intellectual. And he said, what if you could arrive at a workspace and that was the feeling you had, the feeling of when you're sitting next to your dog? I was like, oh my God, like that is so good. Like what a different idea of how to think about workspace, because for so long you would arrive at a place that felt tense. It maybe visually it didn't look safe, so it didn't feel safe. It probably didn't sound soothing. The sounds of phones and beeping and whatever, you know what I mean? Like all the aspects about it, we're not serving this idea of how do we create a safer space. So that was interesting to me. So I love those sorts of explorations into human-centered design. I think there's a challenge though. I'm actually going to toss something out that flies a little bit in the face of human-centered design.
Okay.
And maybe Hollywood, you can come up with a better word since you're a word person here.
Probably not.
I think human-centered design needs a new word. And the reason is it's a little too self-centered. It's a little too selfish because we're at a point in time on our planet where if we continue to put the needs of the human in front of the needs of the planet, we could be in trouble very soon. And I think it would be easy to say, well, if it's good for the planet, it's good for people, right? It would be easy to say that. That feels like a cop-out, to be honestly, because I actually think we're at a point where the humans here are going to have to make sacrifices so that generations that we will never see can live better. And so it's like human-centered design for the humans that don't even exist yet. That's kind of what I'm thinking about. Because if I talk about human-centered design, a lot of it's also about experience, right? Delivering a fantastic experience for a person. Experience also usually includes convenience, right? You don't want people to be inconvenienced. And so human-centered design can be all about creating like a very special, great experience that has everything you need right there. But convenience also often comes at the cost of the environment. So I think that's the struggle I'm having.
To make sure I fully understand what you're saying. So it sounds like you think that we need to kind of split between generational and human and kind of blend them together, kind of the individual and the generation as a whole, and tie that into the earth. That sounds like a pretty tall order of fixing everything, you know?
It's a super tall order. I think that's what we're faced with. I mean, I think if we only focused on our needs, I'm concerned that we're heading down the wrong path. And I would love to hear arguments for and against it, because I'm struggling with it in my brain. I just know that we can't continue to live and do things in the ways that we're doing them and in the pace that we're doing them for forever. I mean, we just can't, right? I mean, the planet will suffer and everyone will suffer. Maybe we won't because, we have another 80 years or whatever, the planet will suffer. So that's my concern is, and I can't imagine that it would not come at an inconvenience. Like it is like life will have to get more inconvenient for us to heal the planet. That's my feeling, at least.
Well, it's very profound to think about, especially with that idea of inconvenience at the end. I mean, when you were saying that, it was kind of a couple of thoughts kept popping up of it's hard to sell an idea as good when you have to temporarily inconvenience the immediate person. And I feel like that inconvenient step to the immediate reaction is that's the major obstacle with everything, isn't it? Like,
you have nailed it. Yeah, that's it.
It's hard to sell something as a multi-step, or to like take a step back and slow down, or you might suffer a little bit, but it's hard to put suffering in perspective, I guess, even though it's not suffering, but the world is suffering, the environment's suffering. I feel like we can all global climate, global warming is a problem. The earth is suffering. Can we not just deal with a little bit of a problem ourselves? Just maybe not as many Starbucks. Can't believe I said that out loud.
But that's it, right? Like, I mean, I can hit a button and get anything I want in 2 days.
Right.
Come on. I mean, there's no way it's a beautiful design. It's a human-centered process by all means. I mean, how easy has that become? But it's led to proliferation of stuff, and Lord knows the carbon footprint of pulling things off like that. I don't know. I just feel like there is a tension between human-centered design and doing what's right for the planet, and that tension needs a new name and kind of a new, and there's, maybe not. Maybe that name exists. There's someone out there like, come on, like I've been writing articles on this for years. Like, how do you not know this, right? That's probably out there. And, maybe my head's in the sand, but we'll see.
I mean, I hope somebody's out there being like, I already have this written down 12-step problem solved and ready to go. But how would you hypothetically save time? How would you say that, not save time, save the world? To save the world, how would you bridge this gap? Because I feel like it would have to come in multiple steps. Maybe that's just me spitballing ideas.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's not just a design problem. It's an everybody problem and an everything problem. And it probably starts with education, policy, voting. I mean, it's as deep rooted as all the systems that we live in. And you know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's all of that.
So somebody needs it down and just go through list by list, I feel like. Or maybe that's just my approach. Just take a list and, okay, what are the engineers going to do to fix it? What are these people going to do to fix it? What are the,
Yeah. Culturally, how do we define success? Culturally, how do we define happiness? All these things, like it might go as deep as that.
It probably will by the end of it, but it's crazy to think about the events that have shaped our lives. I feel like, because you think that they're huge, massive, and sometimes they're just tiny little things, like the invention of being able to click a button in the grand scheme of life and get your stuff in 2 days. That doesn't seem huge, but it is, I guess. Or at least for me, it doesn't seem like it's very simple. It's in my computer screen. That's it. That's all I have to look at. I click my button and I'm done. But,
Yeah. And it's amazing. I mean, I have a friend, John Strassner. He's the chief sustainability officer at ASID. And he said, you're going to have to be okay with being a hypocrite, and you're going to have to be okay with speaking out, even though you don't know the answers. And I love how he gives people permission, because at the end of the day, we're all kind of in that space, like I'm learning so much. I'm learning a lot from John, actually, and Verda. So together, John and Verda Alexander, they host a podcast called Break Some Dishes. And so I follow them and I learn about sustainability, but then they also kind of give you the permission to understand, like you can't look, I'm using these things, that I'm saying are like, wow, they must come at a cost. But you're better off talking about it and being a hypocrite than just pretending like these things don't exist.
No, that's very true. I mean, it's such a weird concept. Like I feel like we cringe away from the phrase hypocritical. Hypocritical. Wow, I could actually say that in a sentence, I swear. We cringe away from it and we're like afraid of it. But I don't know. Like I said, I love words and I love wordplay. So if you throw an extra word at me, I'm like, yes, let's adapt it. Let's use it. Let's go. Lean into it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we do cringe away from being called a hypocrite. But in this case, it's like, I'd rather be called one than be called ignorant, So, oh well. but we're, it's big stuff to solve, and we're hopefully making strides. I can't say that you or I will figure it out, but I trust maybe that's the optimist in me. I trust that humans are creative. I believe in the generations that are coming up and the priorities and the way they see the world, and I have a lot of faith.
I would also have a lot of faith. I feel like they're smarter than I am. My little goddaughter, I swear, she's shown me how much smarter and how much greater they're going to be in the future than anything I could do right now or did at 2 years old. I was not using an iPod and finding kitten videos at 2. So
I know. And I think that, I hope we create a more creative generation. I think we'll be forced to. I believe creativity is going to be how we solve our problems. It's going to be creativity. If we all just try to change our behaviors, I don't think that will get us there, but creativity will. And so that's I think the thing that I'm most interested in seeing fostered in that next generation. And honestly, and beyond. I would love to see us transition our workplaces to be more creative, or more creative centric. Our schools, our reward systems, how do we better foster creativity? That's a subject I love to explore with guests and that sort of thing. So
how would you see creativity starting to be fostered in the workplace? How do you bring that in, I guess, even as an interior designer?
Well, I'll start you on the foot of my kid's bed, okay, as they're going to sleep. Now, this was 5 years ago. They don't want me to tell them bedtime stories anymore. They're past that, but they would want a bedtime story. Okay. And I would sit on the bed and I would come up with the craziest stuff. Okay. And they would giggle. It was fun, right? I would share the wildest, dumbest stories. And I found myself getting better at it. Right. And I started really thinking about creativity. I started really thinking about why when I'm sitting at the edge of that bed, am I more creative than when I'm in my workplace, which demands creativity from me. Right. And there's several reasons. Number one, judgment. When I'm with my kids at the end of that bed, there is no advantage to playing it safe. But when you're surrounded by your coworkers, most people feel they fear judgment, and that gets in the way of creativity in a big way. So I feel like judgment is the enemy of creativity. And so our workplaces can do more, not just the people in them, but the places themselves can do more to create judgment-free spaces. I mean, if you take a boardroom, your typical, United States office boardroom, and you put that side by side with the colorful bedroom and the kid's bed that I'm sitting on, and you tell me where you'd be more creative, that's a pretty easy answer. So understanding what we need from people now more than anything, which is really creativity, because artificial intelligence is replacing a lot of the day-to-day decisions that we're making. That's a different looking workplace. It just is. If you want a workplace that will evoke creativity, that will lower judgment, that's a different place. Another thing is laughter. Like we should be talking more about laughter in the workplace. It's healthy. And when people laugh, there's a sense of openness that happens where people are more willing to share ideas. If you go a whole week at work and there's no laughter, that's a pretty bad sign of your culture. So like knowing that laughter matters. Okay, well, what does that mean about design? I mean, surely that will impact the physical place and how we think about space and kind of color and human interaction. So I think that we have a little bit of like rebranding to do of the workplace and what the office is. Oh my gosh, can I get into a little sidebar here about rebranding the office? Okay.
I love that. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I was having this conversation with a colleague of mine, Lydia Moya. We compared the office to a side of broccoli when you're a kid. Okay. Because when you're a kid, so many kids grow up and they hate broccoli. And the reason is because their parents made them eat it, right? And they didn't have a choice. They made them eat it every time they served it. And the office has become that kind of side of broccoli. For years, people were just forced to go into the office. And now, like all of a sudden they have a choice. Well, if they had a choice all along, like broccoli is great. I love broccoli. It's good for you. I think the office is great. I think the office is good for you. But if it was a choice all along, then maybe we'd feel differently about it. And there wouldn't be this war cry that you're hearing now of like people not wanting to go to an office.
Even to extend that metaphor, it's all about how you prepare it. Like you love your broccoli in certain ways.
So good.
Certain ways you don't like it in others. I mean, I hated like boiled broccoli. And if you could find an office just like that, I imagine you could walk in and be like, this is my boiled broccoli office. We're not coming in here.
That's so true. The office was a boiled side of broccoli.
Yes.
That's so good. Yeah. All right. That was a fun little tangent. I don't even know how we got there. We talked about rebranding. Yeah. The office needs a rebrand. It does.
I guess. So would you say that being able to work from home would be the equivalent of being in your kid's bedroom at night then in this situation? Or is it just pulling your kid's bedroom into your office is more where you're trying to go with this?
It's understanding. Yeah. It's understanding all those factors. The factor that that's a judgment-free space. That's a space where I feel safe. I feel like myself. It feels human. Those things are the things that can support a more creative mindset. So that can be your home. It can also be the right office space, the well-prepared office space. And even let's go a layer deeper too. The time of day matters. It doesn't have to matter, but it mattered because it's the end of the day. All my emails are done. I don't have distractions, right? So I'm free to sort of think. When you're in your workday, there's dings and emails and calendars and all these things. It's hard to get into that state of mind where you are your most creative. So I also think if you want to be creative in your workday, there's a discipline around kind of letting go of all the immediate distractions and moving out of the kind of urgent but non-important world and into the not so urgent but very important world of creativity.
That's very I haven't heard it phrased that way. That's a very profound way to say it. It's a very interesting, I feel like, conversation as a whole. Like you definitely seem very focused on, or maybe you're not intending to, but I definitely hear a lot of the humans are also helping to set that setting a lot. Like when you're talking about even just creativity, I know that as designers, we're like, okay, we can control our fabrics. And as you were mentioning, the light and things, and you're pulling your kid's bed into it. I guess interested in hearing more is that you also seem to focus on like the way that we're approaching it as physical people, and talking about it is key.
Totally.
It does seems to be kind of like an underlying, well, maybe shift for you, or from what you were talking about when I was listening to your first episodes versus what you're saying more now, or
yeah. I think it's and that's probably where I am most comfortable. I feel like I probably understand people better than I understand space. But at the same time, the connection between the two are so huge. Yeah, and creativity has just been a subject that I love to explore personally. And so I didn't really plan to take the conversation in that direction, but it just sort of unfolded that way. And I'm glad you gave me the rope to do so.
No, I absolutely have loved this conversation. It's a really interesting facet. I feel like we don't get a chance to talk to you about designers, like especially not if you could think of creativity as a program. I feel like we separate it out in design, or at least from my experience, we don't program creativity, or we do through like certain ways, but isn't that kind of limiting in itself if you're programming versus providing opportunities?
Yeah. Like, do those things naturally have a tendency to clash? Is that what you're saying? Like programming and creativity in general?
Well, I feel like more that what I'm saying is more that like sometimes I guess what you were saying earlier, if you program it too hard, choke it too hard, you no longer can be creative. You no longer have that good conversation or that spark. So I'm going way back to the beginning of our conversation.
Yeah, you need to give yourself the space to be in that mindset and I think it's worth understanding creativity at a more human and a more scientific level, the same way that an athlete should understand their muscles, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a runner and you take your running seriously, you probably understand, like the how you build muscle, what muscles are important, right? How your muscles work on your legs, how they feel, like that would just make sense, right? Well, if, like our sport as office workers, I mean, like very big part of that is creativity, right? And like if that is our muscle that we're using, and we should take the time to understand it better. Mm-hmm. And I've had a joy doing that. I mean, like there's some great, I'll leave you with one more creativity tip. There's something called stepping stones that I just love. If you run a studio or you're in a studio with colleagues, I like to always talk about stepping stones. I mean, how many times have you heard people say, "Oh, I know this is a terrible idea. All right, I'm just not going to share it." Or they're just going to say, "This is a terrible idea, but here you go." Like instead of saying it's a terrible idea, it's good to share your silly ideas, because a stepping stone is when you share a silly idea that someone else then catches a spark, and it's a stepping stone to their big idea, right? Mm-hmm. And so now what I do is encourage our team to actually use the word stepping stone. Like, hey, here's a stepping stone, and then you share kind of a wild, silly idea, and it's a good way for people to feel safe about sharing ideas, because so many of the wildest ideas end up just dying in our heads, and we forget them and we never share them, and it could have inspired something great in someone else. And so that's a little creativity tip that I love to share.
No, that's a great tip. Thank you. I really point. I definitely do the same thing where I say, "Oh no, can't share that. It's not fully formed there." So it seems like it'd also be a great way to just foster positive encouragement in like an office, especially with your team. Have you seen like a good, like more willingness to share and collaborate now that you've introduced the stepping stone idea?
Yeah, I feel like I have. And in addition, I would start most of the meetings where I was host with a bad joke. I would just tell like a silly dad joke or something. You would love it, Hollywood. Like you would totally be down for it, like a pun or something, right? And it completely changes the vibe of the meeting, and like you can literally, like, so when I do that, you can literally see people's postures change, like they're leaving their inbox, they're coming into a room, they're tense, and then we lead with a joke, and like their faces change, their postures change, and their body is going to inform the way their mind thinks. Like you are connected so strongly, and it can help create different kind of meeting.
Well, it seems to almost make people more present from the way you're describing it, like the difference between focusing and dial. I know I did hand gestures. That's what my dad always does when I would be distracted as a kid. He'd be like, focus. So I subconsciously do that. I love it. But that idea of like being present versus like you're actually there, you're contributing, you get more from the experience. So that's really good to hear. That's a good tip. I feel like anybody listening should like go steal that. Make sure you like TM Doug before you put it in the office.
TM, that's funny. So Hollywood, what would be your piece of advice that you would leave me with?
Let's see. My piece of advice, kind of in the same vein, I feel like like we don't use design charrette as much as we could. So I feel like maybe this is from a very naive, just leaving studio point of view, but I feel like the best projects were the ones where I showed up to a room with a piece of paper, red pens, and said, absolutely destroy it. Tell me everything that could possibly be wrong and throw out your wildest crazy ideas. And that was always my best projects. That was always the best interactions. And it broke the ice because you weren't putting anybody down, but you were acknowledging that things could be better. So I feel like if we can take that into work as a whole, like don't be afraid to call an engineer and be like, I don't understand, but I would love to. Can we like sit down and talk about it? I feel like that was a very uneloquent way to rephrase everything you said this entire episode of communication is key and don't be afraid to reach out.
I love the advice there. You know, we let go of that a little bit in the professional world. You know, I don't think we probably do enough of that. I don't know if sometimes ego gets in the way or whatever it is, but there's certainly an opportunity to do more.
Yeah, I would love a like giant worldwide document that was just everybody wrote their best tips on. And we just sent it across the entire world and just let everybody write on it. And I imagine it would be amazing if we could do that level of like design it one day.
I absolutely love that. That is so cool. You know, that's actually one of the reasons I love podcasts in general, not podcasting, but podcasts and listening is, you know, we only get to experience our own mind. Like we go through life and we only have access to one brain for an hour on a podcast because you're not in the conversation, but you're in it. If that makes sense. You're not having it, but you're in it. You actually get to live through someone else's brain for an hour. At least that's what it feels like to me. And that's what I love about podcasts. And so far being a host has kind of given me that weekly access that I love.
No, it's wonderful to like get outside of yourself in a way, because you don't know what you don't know until you don't know it.
That's good.
But it's so interesting. I do love podcasts. I feel like that's the best podcast where you like suddenly walk away and go, wait, no, I was never living in the 1920s at this time. But you're like completely convinced you were there. You can taste it. You can feel it. You can pull in that memory.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It really adds layers to who you are.
It really does. Yeah. So I do have to ask, because I know that we're running into the end of our show, but if you could give advice to any undergrad student, graduate student, anybody starting their career, what would you like to leave them with and wrap up?
All right. Well, I've covered the communication. We've talked about creativity. Here's a bit of advice that I'll layer into that. Don't underestimate the value of your friendship and your validation. What I have learned in interviewing people is even the most, like I'll talk to the CEO of a, 10,000 person organization or the CIO of JLL, right? And at the end, almost every guest will ask the same thing, which was, how did I do? Did I do a good job? Everybody is after the same thing. Everyone wants validation. And so if you're in a networking opportunity, if you feel like you don't belong or that you're not enough, like to go up and tell somebody that might be more senior than you or something, hey, good work, good job, or love what you did, then you're misjudging the value that you bring, because I have found that we're all seeking that. Everybody wants to be validated. And then once you understand that, it becomes a little bit of a code, like if you can break that code and be that person that does that, you'll really stand out.
Thank you. That's some great advice. I definitely feel like that's something that we haven't covered before. I always like to give, just a little tidbit. Well, you said you listen, so I like to give a little tidbit to all my designers as someone who just graduated. But where can everybody find both you and your podcast and just even your firm in general?
Awesome. So the firm is OFS, so ofs.com. That part's easy to find. Imagine a place. The podcast is really going to be anywhere you listen to podcasts. And I would say the best way to connect with me is through LinkedIn. I'm on all the social channels, but that's where I'm going to do most of my sharing and talk to new people. And then I'll have an opportunity to talk about this conversation, which will be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear what you have to say. But I've absolutely loved having you on the show. Thank you so much. If you ever want to do it again, please do. I feel like we had so much we could have talked about and so much we did. I really enjoyed the journey.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, Hollywood. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely didn't know where I was going to take this. But sorry if I rambled, but I really love the opportunity to chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of Architecture, Coffee, and Ink. Check out the blog as always for the transcript, show notes, and sources. You may have noticed there's actually 2 episodes being released today, this one and The Tunnels Part 2, so make sure you go and check out that episode. Everything will be updated and uploaded onto the blog before Sunday morning with all of the transcript for the episodes that I'm releasing this week and all of the past ones. Please rate, review, and subscribe if you want to see more content. It seriously helps. But thank you all for sharing in 2022, and I am so excited to move forward into 2023. You can find me on Instagram at Architecture Coffee and Ink, or hit up my regular Insta if you really like iPhone photography. Check the show out at architecturecoffeeandink.com. That's A-N-D this time.com. Email the show at architecturecoffeeandink@gmail.com. And I'm excited to meet with all my designers, dreamers, and DIY enthusiasts next time. But in the meantime, may your coffee mugs be full and your inkwells never run dry.